Very good evening and welcome. You're watching the India Development Debate with me, Tamanna Inamdar. What started as an informal club in 2009 to challenge a world order dominated by the US and its Western allies has emerged as a dominant force in the global south. The emerging economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa now count for more than 40% of the world population and a quarter of the global economy. The 15th Brics Summit held in Johannesburg marks the first in-person meeting of member leaders since 2019 and is significant not only because of the events which have occurred in these past 4 years, but also because of the complex relationship between the member nations. Where do China and India stand when it comes to geopolitical relations? How does the Russia-Ukraine conflict affect the bloc? And how relevant is the group with such divergent interests? But the big headline today, of course, coming out of the Brics meeting in South Africa, Johannesburg, is the addition of 6 new members. And these member nations now bolster Brics' presence in the world. Now we're talking about today on how Brics will be influencing the world. Let's first listen into a message from Prime Minister Modi.
भारत का ये मत रहा है कि नए सदस्यों के जुड़ने से ब्रिक्स एक संगठन के रूप में मजबूत तथा हमारे सभी साझा प्रयासों को एक नया बल देने वाला होगा। इस कदम से विश्व के अनेक देशों का मल्टीपोलर वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर में विश्वास और सुदृढ़ होगा। मुझे खुशी है कि हमारी टीम्स ने मिलकर एक्सपांशन के गाइडिंग प्रिंसिपल्स, स्टैंडर्ड्स, क्राइटेरिया और प्रोसीड्यूर पर सहमति बनाई है और इनके आधार पर आज हम अर्जेंटीना, इजिप्ट, ईरान, सऊदी अरब, इथियोपिया और यूएई का ब्रिक्स में स्वागत करने के लिए सहमत हुए हैं। वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल के बावजूद भारत आज विश्व की फास्टेस्ट ग्रोइंग मेजर इकोनॉमी है। जल्द ही भारत $5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी बन जाएगा। इस बात में कोई संदेह नहीं कि आने वाले वर्षों में भारत विश्व का ग्रोथ इंजन होगा। ये इसलिए है क्योंकि भारत ने आपदा और मुश्किलों के समय को आर्थिक सुधार के अवसर में परिवर्तित किया। पिछले कुछ वर्षों में हमने मिशन मोड में जो रिफॉर्म्स किए हैं उनसे भारत में ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस में लगातार बढ़ोतरी हुई है। हमने कंप्लायंस बर्डन को कम किया है, रेड टेप को हटाकर रेड कारपेट बिछा रहे हैं। जीएसटी और इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंक्रप्सी कोड के लागू होने से इन्वेस्टर कॉन्फिडेंस बढ़ा है। रक्षा और अंतरिक्ष जैसे क्षेत्र जिनको प्रतिबंधित माना जाता था, आज प्राइवेट सेक्टर के लिए खोल दिए गए हैं। हमने पब्लिक सर्विस डिलीवरी और गुड गवर्नेंस पर विशेष रूप से ध्यान केंद्रित किया है। टेक्नोलॉजी के इस्तेमाल से भारत ने फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन की और एक बड़ी छलांग लगाई है।
All right, so that's the big news this evening. 2 big talk points actually coming out of the Brics meet. One is the addition of 6 member nations. Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, UAE and Saudi Arabia have joined the Brics club. The other big talk point was because Prime Minister Modi briefly spoke with the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the summit. Now, this is important because, of course, China and India have been at loggerheads since 2020, ever since China's incursion into eastern Ladakh. That problem is not yet solved. 19 meetings have taken place, and Brics was an important forum where the two leaders have had some sort of conversation. But the big picture, what really is the relevance of BRICS? The idea has been to have a counterbalance to the G7. Is this what we really want? Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador and representative of India at WTO, is speaking with me today. I'm speaking with Maroof Raza, consultant and strategic affairs expert. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us on the India Development Debate. Mr. Dasgupta, let me begin with your take on the relevance of BRICS in a multipolar world where every nation has their own agenda and purpose, and bilaterals have taken center stage.
The BRICS was set up in 2009 with, of course, South Africa joining a year later, basically with economic cooperation in mind. The result of BRICS till 2015 showed two very important developments. One was the setting up of the new development bank, which earlier used to be called the BRICS Development Bank, with a capital of $50 billion to start with, and to be expanded to about $100 billion. The second part of the economic cooperation was the setting up of the contingent reserve arrangement. And this was to be extended with, again, a corpus of $100 billion, with China contributing about $41 billion, and India, Brazil, Russia contributing $18 billion apiece. So this was meant to allow countries to overcome their liquidity problems as a consequence of opening up of their economy. And apart from the BRICS members, of course, none of them have drawn from this, but Bangladesh, Uruguay, and another country have, indeed, Egypt, they have drawn from this contingent reserve arrangement. The third initiative taken, of course, that has yet to fructify, was to have a cable connection, inter-country cable connection, bypassing the United States, so as to overcome problems related to security. But that is yet to see the light of the day because of various economic problems that have been encountered in setting up a connection. So with the expansion of BRICS now, the agenda is likely to move solely from economics to one which will involve diplomacy, which will involve a common front, in a sense, to articulate the viewpoints of the West as against the West of the global South. Because in this summit, South Africa has invited all the members of the African Union. Apart from South Africa, there are 54 other members. And it had also invited 20 Asian nations and small island countries. So this is a growing movement which will have a very large political and diplomatic content in the future if it expands at the current pace. It may be mentioned that apart from the six, there were a host of other countries, including Mexico, Nigeria, Uruguay, etc., who all want to come in and become members of BRICS.
Okay, you know, it's a very detailed perspective you've given us, but I just want to come back to my core question, and I'm coming to Maroof Raza on that. I'm going to put it very simply. Does BRICS really work for India right now, considering that we're playing an important part in the formations like, you know, G7 and its extensions? We are looking at ourselves as a nation on the seat of that table as well. We want to be representing the global South. We want to be playing at the top level of international politics. How important is BRICS for us today?
Well, you know, Tamanna, India has to do a certain amount of tough tiptoe walking. And this is essentially a very, very tightrope walk right now, what you're watching in BRICS. Because India is the only country, as far as I know, which is an important member or certainly an observer in many international forums. From G20 is the president. The next month, we're going to have the G20 summit in Delhi. where even President Biden is expected to attend, and so are the other G20 leaders like China, Russia, etc. The other thing is that we are members also of the SCO, which is a China-led forum which was created to counter European and Western economic geopolitical influence. So right now, this effort to expand BRICS is a challenge which some saw to the dominance of the Western countries on the geopolitical scenario, especially the economic scenario. The second thing is the expansion now that has been agreed with Saudi Arabia, UAE, and even countries like Argentina is a very clear signal that BRICS is not going to lean against the West. In fact, even though China had tried hard to muster up the BRICS members into a grouping that would stand firm, staring down at the Western world. But that's not going to be possible. Because Saudi Arabia and UAE in particular, we know where they lie, their loyalties. As far as India is concerned, India is increasing trade, India is increasing engagement with America in particular, Western countries, and many other BRICS members, makes India a very sensible and a serious middle force, which nobody can ignore. And you can't say that we'll put India aside and get on with the anti-Western agenda, but nobody can take into their wraps and make it a front, which you, as you said in the introduction, which makes up 40% of the world's population and 25 or so percent of the world's economy. So there are very complicated issues. BRICS started off, as Ambassador Dasgupta has brought out, as a kind of acronym created by Mr. O'Neill, who was an economist with Goldman Sachs. But since then, BRICS had led to many meanings. At that point of time, whether it was Russia, whether it was China, whether it was growing India, all these economies were give or take a little, almost on the same platform in terms of the size and strength of the economy. But China has grown leaps and bounds. Russia is now not engaging with and not being allowed to engage with the West. And these countries have on tow with them countries like Iran and others who may not be BRICS members, but they're very clearly against the Western alliances. So it's going to present a big diplomatic challenge in the long term. But I must say, in all honesty, that other than BRICS summit, you really don't see any serious initiative coming out in the geopolitical order from the BRICS grouping, whether it was during the pandemic, whether it's been after that, or whether it is even in terms of trying to use this platform to solve the crisis in Ukraine, so that at least the world can say, here is one bloc which is in support of calling off the war in Ukraine. So my big question is, other than shaking hands and group photographs and heads of state short bilateral hellos, what has BRICS achieved? What is BRICS going to achieve?
Yeah, that's a valid question. That's a valid question. There were news, there were reports, there was talk of a BRICS common currency. India wasn't interested. We want to internationalize the rupee. There was a bit of back and forth on which countries would be added to the club. Reportedly, China was pushing for Pakistan. India put its foot down. The basic question that Maroof has raised, Ambassador Dasgupta, how would you look at that? Apart from the photo ops, the annual meeting, what is BRICS doing? What is it adding in terms of value to this bloc?
Mr. Maroof Raza has indeed raised very pertinent questions. It could end up being a large talking shop in a sense, because apart from Russia, all the other countries are developing countries at different stages of development. In fact, the 6 that are there at the moment have been termed as emerging markets, including Russia. So with the dilution of the economic focus, if I may say so, and you know, the very difficult nature of forming a currency union, etc., which was propounded in the earlier phase of BRICS, being a distant reality now, if at all, it would become a kind of a political and partially economic forum where there could be assistance provided to the smaller members and the needy members in terms of economic assistance through the new development bank, contingent reserve arrangement. But basically, it would be a kind of a forum, which I perceive, which would be used to articulate the views of the global south, because that is the way it is headed, with the inclusion of more countries possible in the near future. China wanted to have legitimacy provided by the BRICS to its Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Development Initiative, which India had opposed. And of course, as Mr. Raza mentioned, the inclusion of Pakistan. That is something which we will have to look out for. The other point which needs to be mentioned is that as a forum, if it has too many smaller countries, and Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs, who was responsible for putting out a book in which was an Indian lady researcher called Rupa Purushottamam, who coined the expression BRIC, because at that point South Africa was not included.
Right.
Now in that context, Jim O'Neill has now said that expansion of BRICS should not include countries with a population of less than 10 crores, which will exclude a lot of these countries which have now come in, because then the economic heft would be lost.
Right. There's a report. There's a report that claims that the last-minute negotiation over who will be included to the club, so to speak, also had conditions laid out by India, reportedly, that there should be a minimum criteria of at least X amount of GDP of that nation. They shouldn't be attracting sanctions. If that had gone through, then Iran would have not got a membership, but they're definitely in. I just want to turn, your attention to another sort of development at BRICS, and I think it's fairly significant considering the context. Maroof Raza, I'll come to you on this, is the very brief exchange between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. Do you put any store by it? Obviously, there's been no readouts. We don't know what they said. Perhaps it was just a hi, hello, how are you? But it's important, isn't it, in the current context?
See, Tamanna, it's over 25 years that I've closely watched India-Pakistan relations. And every time there was something like a SAARC summit or even the SCO summit, there used to be a lot of excitement in the media that Indian Prime Minister would meet Pakistan's Prime Minister or Pakistan's leader, as Musharraf was. And, over a cup of tea, they would solve the problem of Kashmir. But really, it fell flat on its face because those who have these expectations don't understand the problems. I have done, in the past few years, considerable study on India-China boundary relations. And therefore, I know for a fact that China is adamant on its boundary strategy, going the way it wants to, particularly on the LAC. Otherwise, 15, 16 rounds of talks leading to nothing should be a clear indicator to anybody that China is not interested in giving an inch, but it's interested in taking a mile. And we need to understand that in all bilateral arrangements where there is tension, especially territorial tension, there has to be a serious give and take as to if you want back what you claim is yours, what are you willing to give so that the other party would be happy to go away with a face saver. Just a handshake over the G20 summit in Bali, or right now the meeting in the BRICS summit in South Africa. I mean, these are minimum courtesies that you share with the enemy state also. It doesn't really lead to anything except if Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi agree that in the forthcoming G20 summit in India, they would both take out time for at least a half a day's serious engagement before or after the G20 summit and really nuts and bolts of the problem have to be discussed and their deputies have to be instructed that proceed further. Right now, the news is that they're almost close to agreeing on positions of each side, waiting for the okay from the top. But what okay from the top is likely to happen is a matter of serious consideration and conjecture.
Absolutely.
I don't think very much has come out of their brief meeting in South Africa, and very much will come out in the G20 summit. But India should take time out to engage with China more seriously instead of getting overwhelmed with all the heads of state that are going to come for the G20 summit.
Well, you know, we're the host in G20. It's also, I think, very telling that Xi Jinping is coming. Everyone's descending in New Delhi in a few days from now, Joe Biden. And yeah, we have a big event ahead of us as a nation as well. Jayant Dasgupta, just very quickly, your thoughts on India, China, and whether G20 is going to be a forum where there could be more detailed conversations.
I entirely agree with Mr. Raza that it is going to be an exchange of pleasantries and, photo op. Nothing serious, if at all, is going to come out of a meeting between PM Modi and President Xi Jinping. And as the results of the 19th round of commander-level talks show, the Chinese are adamant on holding on to their ground. And this is the same stance that they have shown in respect of all the other countries with whom they have border disputes, whether in the maritime arena or on the basis of land. So the Chinese are playing hardball, and we will have to engage with them. Of course, it goes without saying. But from a position of strength, we can't really concede things just because the Chinese are asking for it. So there is going to be a stalemate and continued tension, to my mind, and we need to strengthen our defenses and build up our infrastructure so that the Chinese are also, they also get to know that there will be a very, very strong response if they try any misadventure. And of course, on the economic front, we still are dependent for a lot of our components and raw materials and finished products on China. That is why, of course, China has just been pipped to the first position by the US. But the Chinese continue to export a huge amount of goods to India. And there is a very large trade deficit vis-a-vis China. So that is an area of concern, and we need to take steps to address that situation over the medium term.
All right, so BRICS has ended, but G20 is on the anvil, and exciting things to watch out. New members in BRICS, we'll see how much heft they add to this grouping, which is to increase the strength of the global south. Thank you so much, Jayant Dasgupta and Maroof Raza, for joining us today. I'm going to take a very short break, but stay tuned. We're coming back